No, we're going to be more inclusive. All right, I will call this Tigard City Council meeting to order and Local Contract Review Board meeting to order as well. Roll call, please.
Councillor Lube.
Here.
Councillor Anderson.
Here.
Mayor Snyder.
Here.
Youth Councillor Turley. Council President Goodhouse.
Here.
Councillor Newton.
Here.
All right, all please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, council or staff, do we have any non-agenda items?
Staff have none, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. We'll move on to citizen communication. City Manager Wine, is there any follow-up from previous citizen communication?
No, Mr. Mayor.
All right, no one has signed up to speak. Is there anyone that's present in the audience that would like to speak who did not sign up? Okay. We'll move on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda is used for routine items such as approval of minutes, receipt of council meeting calendars, proclamations, appointments to boards and committees, and approval of contracts or intergovernmental agreements with partner agencies. Detailed information on each item is available on the city's website in the packet for this meeting. Approval may be enacted in one motion without separate discussion. Anyone may request that an item be removed by motion for discussion and separate action. Tonight we are considering approving an intergovernmental agreement with Metro for Washington Square Grant Award and considering a contract award for Main Street Phase 2 design. Is there a motion or discussion?
I move for the adoption of the consent agenda as presented.
Second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, consent agenda is passed unanimously. Next item on the agenda is a legislative public hearing to consider an ordinance adopting a construction excise tax. I will open the public hearing. Hearing procedures for tonight. Anyone will be able to offer testimony. There's a sign-up sheet at the front of the room. Associate Planner Warren, staff report.
Staff is on the way.
Okay.
It'll just be a moment.
Hello, Mr. Warren.
I'm here to bring forth two proposals tonight related to affordable housing. The first is a construction excise tax proposal. There we go. A construction excise tax is a tax that's levied on the permanent value of construction. These taxes were enabled by Senate Bill 1533, passed in 2016, and they can be levied on both residential and commercial construction. Under that bill, residential CETs are limited to a maximum of 1% of the permit value, and those residential CETs must be allocated according to a state formula. 50% goes to developer incentives for housing, so that can be SDC exemptions, tax abatements, etc. 35% goes to flexible, affordable housing programs to be used at the city's discretion. And then 15% go to Oregon Housing and Community Services for home ownership programs, and those dollars actually come back to Tigard, so it supports home ownership in Tigard. Commercial and industrial CETs are not limited, but 1% is typical in those jurisdictions that have enacted a commercial CET. The state also has a formula for how those are allocated, with 50% going to affordable housing programs. So far, 10 jurisdictions across the state have enacted a CET. Most recently, Milwaukee and nearby Portland, but Corvallis, Eugene, Canyon Beach, Hood River City, Anne County, Newport, Tillamook County. So why are we considering a CET? Well, one of the key reasons that we would adopt a CET is that it helps us to promote and support affordable housing. Specifically, it backfills SDC exemptions. So we've had a SDC exemption for affordable housing on the books for about a year and a half now, and CET can actually help backfill that lost revenue to parks and transportation funds. It does fund those flexible affordable housing programs, and I'll get into that a little bit more down the road. It supports affordable homeownership in Tigard through that state down payment assistance program, and it is a key implementation step for the affordable housing plan. So if you'll think back to June, when the council considered the affordable housing plan, there was a menu of various strategies to support affordable housing in the community. Two of the key elements of that plan were the funding sources to implement those programs, one being the CET and the other being joint entitlement for the Community Development Block Grant Program. So how are they assessed? As I mentioned at the top, it's a tax that's levied on the permit value of construction. So it's important to note here that permit value is based on the construction cost, not on the sale price or the land value. So it's actually a little bit lower than the final sale price. And it's paid prior to the building permit issuance. So here's an example. For a home that would be about $525,000, the home construction cost might be somewhere in the neighborhood of $275,000. So the construction excise tax that would be levied would be $2,750. And that represents about 0.5% of that final sale value. So what is subject to a CET? Well, pretty much any construction that's not specifically exempted. And state mandated exemptions in that Senate Bill 1533. Affordable rental housing is one of them. Private school improvements, public or private hospital improvements, improvements to religious facilities, agricultural buildings, residential improvements that do not add any square footage, public improvements under contracting code, and nonprofit care facilities, so memory care, senior care, that kind of thing. So in adopting a CET, a city or county can opt to add other exemptions. Staff has proposed a list of other exemptions that would be included in the CET. Those exemptions would be public school improvements, so spelling out very clearly that those would be exempted as opposed to just being included under the public contracting code. Affordable housing that's for sale. Accessory dwelling units, and that one would actually have a sunset period that matches the sunset on the system development charge exemption for accessory dwelling units that was adopted earlier this year. Missing middle housing, so cottage clusters, courtyard units, and quads would be exempt from 50% of the CET. And permits of value $50,000 or less. And then importantly, we thought it was key to get an exemption for situations where someone's home is destroyed accidentally, they want to replace it, but maybe they want to add a little bit of square footage when they replace it, and so as long as no more than 10% of living space is added, it would be fully exempt from CETs in that situation. So looking at what the city could expect in terms of CET revenue, we would look back at previous year's permit activity. So in the most recent year, that would be around $1.7 million in CET. The year prior, it would be about $2.1 million. And when you project back even further, and keep in mind that the last 2 years are very clear figures. The figures from the previous years are estimates. We think they're pretty close, but could be a little bit higher. But you can see that as construction trails off, as it did, during the last recession, we can expect a much lower rate of CET revenue. So as far as how that breaks down in the budget forecast, again, those totals are 2.1 and 1.7 for the last 2 fiscal years. And you can see section the relative contribution of the residential CET versus the commercial CET. And if you'll notice in fiscal year 17-18 and fiscal year 18-19, those amounts are almost switched. So you can see that there's a big uptick in commercial construction and with a downtick in residential construction. That also has an effect on how the allocations are made according to those state formulas. So with the 17-18 figures, the city is allowed to keep a 4% administrative fee, so that would be maybe $4,000 off the top in that year. The SDC backfill in that year would be $700,000, but in the year where residential construction decreased, it would only be $267,000. Meanwhile, the Oregon Housing and Community Service programs, $213,000 in 17-18, only $80,000 in the following year. And then the affordable housing programs are relatively steady there. So what kind of things will a CET fund? Well, aside from the state mandated things that I've described, it will help with current affordable housing programs. So again, backfilling those system development charges from the affordable housing exemption program. And we're looking at a number of proposed affordable housing programs that have been detailed in the affordable housing plan, including down payment assistance and permanent affordability programs through a community land trust, support for purchase of low-cost market rate units. Now, that doesn't mean that we would necessarily be buying low-cost market rate units. It means support for it. So if a nonprofit, for example, we're looking to acquire low-cost market rate housing, maintain its affordability through a regulated program, the city would be able to contribute some funding to that. Land banking for affordable housing. Interestingly, land banking for affordable housing is also one of the potential uses that HUD allows for community development block grant funds. So those CDBG funds can actually be put together with CET funds to help the city acquire property in areas where we believe affordable housing would work well. And we could then go out and find nonprofit or for-profit who could build that housing. And then gap financing for affordable rental units. So the city has provided some gap financing in the past, and those urban renewal funds, which of course can only be spent in the urban renewal districts. So for affordable housing that's built outside of those districts, this is a way for the city to provide gap financing.
So I want to make sure that we're limiting our comments at this point, or are speaking to questions specifically about the staff report. Councilor Newton?
Permits of $50,000 or less, What does that look like? I'm wondering if a family, as an affordable strategy, might be interested in adding on to their home because they're growing by a family member or something. So can you tell me what $50,000 or less of a permit value looks like? I mean, can you give me an idea of that?
I'm not enough of
really.
a contractor to be able
Okay.
to probably answer that, I think just based on my own personal knowledge, a typical kitchen renovation, something like that could be anywhere from $25,000 to $50,000. So that's what we were trying to capture is there are going to be those renovations.
Those would be exempted anyway if it didn't
Right.
expand the footprint,
Right.
right?
But, you could be adding on in the back, to expand the bathroom, something like that. And as long as the permit value is under 50,000, even if the permit value went over 2,000, so, for a $100,000 project, you're still only talking about $1,000 out of that project budget.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that as another affordable housing strategy. Somebody saying, okay, we're going to stay where we are, we're going to add on a
Sure.
bedroom or something, and so I didn't know if that would give latitude there. But your point's well taken. It's not going to be that expensive, so thanks.
Council President Goodhouse? No? Okay, I have one question. How did staff arrive at the missing middle at 50%? I guess I'm just wondering, was 25 and 75% debated, or where did that come from, or why not exempt at all? I guess I want to test my understanding of what the staff thinking is on that.
Right, so we knew that we wanted to provide an exemption, but we also knew that the scale of development in those cases, they are typically being done by professional developers as opposed to the accessory dwelling unit, which is a homeowner who is typically doing that kind of development. And so we really, I think the way we arrived at it is just to split the difference between the two, the full cost for the construction of a single detached house and the full exemption for the accessory dwelling unit. And because these units seem to straddle the kind of typical size of an accessory dwelling unit and a full single detached house, the split seemed to be the best option. I suppose we could have gone higher or lower, but we had to pick a figure, and so that's how we arrived at it.
Okay. I mean, I just wanted to understand the rationale.
Sure.
And then the recommended effective date for this is exactly what?
January 1,
January 1?
2020.
Okay. So, and that would be to anything that received a permit on or after that date?
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions that have come up? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Warren. We will move on to public testimony. And I have 6 or 7 people signed up to testify. I'm going to ask you to keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Please come up as I call your name. State your name and address for the record. And Council President Goodhouse, can you keep an eye on the timing? All right, the first person I have on the list is Jackie. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Of course. So my name is Jackie Keogh. Address is 5288 North Interstate Avenue in Portland, Oregon. I'm here as the Deputy Director of Proud Ground. Proud Ground is the region's community land trust. What that means is that we create permanently affordable homeownership opportunities for low and moderate income households so they can buy their first home in the city that they currently live. So in 2018, Proud Ground's Board of Directors made the strategic decision to focus on the city of Tigard as part of a larger effort to mitigate displacement in the Southwest Corridor. Over the past year, 2 years actually, we've worked with the city, Metro, local developers, and nonprofit partners to develop feasibility studies of how to bring more affordable housing to the city of Tigard. And I serve as a member of Tigard's Affordable Housing Task Force, who helped develop the city's affordable housing plan. And so, of course, I'm in support of both the construction excise tax and the tax exemption for nonprofit affordable housing, because, in short, it'll leverage new sources to develop affordable housing in the city of Tigard, which in turn will mitigate displacement of your current residents, those who are most at risk of being displaced as prices increase. So the construction excise tax specifically was one of the key recommendations of our task force because it's essential to pursuing other recommendations within the plan. So we need the construction excise tax funding to do things like purchase land for land banking and supporting first-time homeownership programs. So it's a key first step to moving this plan forward. And I've also served as Unite Oregon's Southwest Quarter Cohort, which is a community-led organizing group. And we have some folks who will join me in testifying that, you know, the community really, their focus is affordable housing, both affordable rental and affordable first-time homeownership. And so this programming, specifically Proud Grounds Community Land Trust programming, will bring permanently affordable homeownership opportunities to the city. This program is flourishing throughout Washington County and other cities like Hillsborough and Beaverton. And with the CET, we'd be able to bring that program here to Tigard. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to bring it at all. In the same vein, the tax exemption for nonprofit affordable housing would support the development of affordable housing. Right now, we have a number of generous property owners who are interested in selling their land to Proud Ground and other nonprofit affordable housing providers, but we can't accept that because we can't hold that land for a long time before we do all the pre-development work. And pretty much that tax exemption would help some of our projects pencil. And so if we're unable to purchase this land in a land bank and hold this land as prices increase in Tigard, what you'll have is market rate developers purchasing that land and they will not be creating affordable housing. And so long-term, Proud Ground is working on a land banking strategy. There's a metro-wide funding to create land banking, and we want to make sure Tigard's part of that.
Thank you. All right, next up is Nina. Your name and address for the record, please.
Yes. Hi, my name is Nina Kung. I live at 7522 Southwest Ashford Street in Tigard. Zip code is 97224. I'm here to speak in support of the CET and also for the tax exemption for developing affordable housing. I have participated in our city's housing displacement prevention in the Southwest Corridor program. There was both an adult cohort and also a youth cohort that met for over a period of 6 months with the support of both Metro, City of Tigard, and also Unite Oregon, which is a nonprofit community organizing, community engagement organization. And it's very clear that Tigard has a great need for affordable housing. There are a lot of people, especially a lot of residents, especially with the development of the light rail, proposed light rail project coming to the Southwest Corridor. The prices for housing has gone up. And so while lots of residents' income has not gone up, to match the increase of housing, we really need to have support and implementation of affordable housing plans. And right now the city has one. And so we are hoping that this exercise tax, construction exercise tax, and also the exemption, tax exemption for the construction of affordable housing will help realize this plan. So then people can have housing security, because without housing security, it's very hard to have security in many different aspects of our life. So that would include impacts on health, jobs, income, being able to take care of our families and set family responsibilities. And so it impacts all aspects of life, of our lives, and quality of living. And so I'm here to express my support for both proposals, and I ask that the council support us on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sheila?
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Sheila Greenlaw, thank with the Community Housing Fund. Our address is 3700 Southwest Murray in Beaverton, but we serve all of Washington County, including Tigard. So I just want to take a few minutes not to repeat too much. You've heard there was a housing plan task force, and I was able to participate in that along with others here. And a number of strategies were kind of winnowed out, and one of them was the construction excise tax. As you saw, some 10 other cities have adopted that. It's one of the few tools that you have available today to make a difference, and we know that you need to make a difference, that Tigard is particularly severely rent burdened, more so than most cities in the rest of the state. It's a big issue, and it requires money to solve and willing partners, and there are a lot of those. So I think what flashed in my mind when I see you sitting there is a number of years ago, and Liz has been here since the 90s, when Vision Task Force in Tigard of citizens and grassroots leaders said we need to do something. And at that point, Mayor Nicolai was where you're sitting, and he agreed to put tax exemption in place. And you were the first city in the Washington County. So I just want to say how much I appreciate that leadership. It's made a big difference over the years as we talk about what a small city can do, even when they have financial burdens. And so we know that's the case today, just as it was then. So what that did was really critical. It helped a lot of projects get started and keep going. And I also had this flash of seeing Angel, a resident of Greenberg Oaks, behind that podium where you're sitting. And Dwayne Roberts, who's a great staff member who we had the opportunity to work with over the years, did a video presentation on affordable housing and why do we care, what can we do. Angel was one of the residents who had the opportunity to get stabilized, to drop her addictions, to get her GED. She's now a homeowner who pays some taxes, and a lot of them in Sherwood, not Tigard, but nearby. And she runs a nonprofit that helps people with mental health and addiction issues. So I think that's what we're here for, is to say a lot of people, there's a diverse population in Tigard, and they can't all afford just with what the market can offer. And so we've seen whole properties closed out, like Walnut Tree, I think was the name of the property that turned over. Families lost their home of a long time and their opportunity to go to schools in Tigard. They're great. So that's what we're all trying to work together. The CET helps provide some flexible funding to do that for both homeownership and rental. And to save you some time later with the public hearing, if it makes sense not to testify again on the tax exemption ordinance, it's important. I think the ways that you're updating it makes sense. And in both cases, staff have done a great job of reviewing around the state how these kinds of ordinances have been put in place and what are some reasonable ways, what should you exempt, how should you apply the funds. And it's, I think you have really well-crafted ordinances that we hope tonight we'll be able to see you adopt. So thank you very much for the time.
Thank you. Tracy? Welcome.
Good evening, thank you. My name is Tracy Staff. I'm with Community Partners for Affordable Housing. The address is 6380 Southwest Capitol Highway, number 151, Portland, 97239. I've worked at SEPA and been involved in the Tigard community for more than 13 years. Over that time, the need for affordable housing has continued to increase, and it has been gratifying to partner with the City of Tigard in this important work of building affordable housing for those most in need. I love my job as communications and fundraising manager because I get to connect the work we do with the larger community. Our executive director, Rachel Duke, has already submitted a letter in support of both the construction excise tax and tax exemption. And these important policies make it possible for organizations like SEPA to do this work. But I also want to share that for over a decade, I have heard personal stories from real people telling us how this I'm so sorry. Telling us how this housing has changed their lives, made their families and children stronger, and given our seniors the opportunity to age with dignity in their own homes. We build housing for people who need affordable and safe places to live, which in turn makes the whole community stronger. Thank you.
Thank you. Corinne?
Good evening, Mayor Schneider, councilors, and Karina Rendies. I live at 9524 Southwest North Dakota. And I do live here in Tigard, and I'm active in the community in a variety of different ways, kind of most relevant to tonight issues. I did participate with Nina in the Tigard anti-displacement learning opportunity provided by Unite Oregon. And it was really a valuable experience to hear the stories of people who are struggling today. Really made me reflect on how lucky I am to be where I am today. And today I am here to encourage you to adopt the CET ordinance. It will provide a needed source of funding for developing regulated affordable housing. While our economy is doing pretty well at the macro level, not everybody in our community is. We know that almost half of the households in Tigard are cost burdened, paying more than the recommended third of their income for housing. And almost a quarter are severely rent burdened, so that means they're paying 50% or more of their income. This clearly demonstrates a shortage of housing units that are affordable to people who are already living and working here in our community. So we know we need more affordable housing, and we also know that the private market's probably not going to supply it at the level that we need. And we also know that funding is one of the biggest barriers for our nonprofit housing providers. As mentioned, passing the CET tax was vetted by the community stakeholders that participated on the Affordable Housing Task Force. On a more personal note, I'd like to share that part of the reason I live here in Tigard is that because when I was a young mom raising a kid working in the service industry, I couldn't afford to live in the neighborhood that my child's other parent was living in. And so I ended up down the hill from Southwest Portland in Tigard because it was an affordable community. It had good schools, good parks, and I could afford to live here. And I'd really like to think that at some point my own child will be able to afford to live here too. And so I would really encourage you to pass this ordinance. It's important. Staff's done a great job of carving out reasonable exemptions to address the concerns of a variety of stakeholders, and it's going to be an important part of the package that's going to address our community's real and pressing needs in a reasonable manner and deserves to be adopted tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Ezra.
Good evening, Mayor, honorable councilors, Ezra Hammer with the Home Builders Association. I'd first like to just say that I really appreciate the 5 speakers that came before me. I think all of their comments are exactly on point, and I think they speak to growing challenges that we're seeing across the region. So I was very touched by their comments, and thank you for that. I also want to thank staff for working diligently on this issue. It is it's always we're always concerned as a residential development community when we see new taxes proposed. And we think that the proposal before you strikes a lot of really eloquent balances, and we strongly support the 5 additional exemptions that staff mentioned in their staff report for your consideration. We also want to note this really is a tax that will impact housing affordability broadly. While we absolutely need to ensure that we're providing capital A regulated affordable housing, the new tax will impact market rate housing across the board. So that's for folks that are making more than your minimum income. And out in our neck of the woods, those are blue collar workers, those are entry level professionals in a number of sectors, and a great deal of folks that live here in the Tigard area. So the reason that I'm before you tonight is to reiterate a request that we made back in June. It's not to say no to this tax. While it may be tough for our membership to understand that taxes in certain situations are really important, we're able to get there, and we're able to get there when we believe that cities are really willing to come to the table and examine kind of some structural administrative reforms on how they tax existing housing. And so what we asked you in June, and what we'll continue to ask for your support here today, is to consider the CET in conjunction with some administrative reforms around how impact fees are collected. Specifically, that is the idea of delaying the collection of the impact fee closer to the certificate of occupancy. Impact fees are structurally in place to ensure that the impacts associated with new development are mitigated. So we charge a parks fee because people live in a house and their children are playing in the park. Same with the roads and same with the water. Those impacts don't exist prior to a house being occupied, but there are very real costs with paying that fee earlier on in the construction process. And as you heard from staff, those fees are paid when a building permit is pulled. The costs are really twofold. One, for smaller scale residential developers, the types of construction loans that they get are much more expensive earlier on in the construction process. So you're paying more expensive money. Secondly, we're paying the carrying costs associated with paying those fees over a period of up to 9 months, depending on what your construction timeline is. I understand that those are kind of dry concepts, but those add up and add thousands of dollars to the cost of every new home produced. And so we ask that you consider that proposal, which we understand staff is working on in conjunction with this, and take the time to consider the impacts of residential development in a holistic manner and not in this fashion. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Warren, do you have response to testimony?
So I will follow up Mr. Hammer's testimony with information for council to let you know that we have worked with our development advisory committee, which includes the home builders, and we have been working on those administrative reforms. It's unfortunately not quite as easy as just changing administrative rules. There are some municipal code changes that will have to occur in order to put those into effect. That's how council chooses to proceed. And we've been doing the background work to find out what the costs are and what the administrative burden is to get those things set up. Based on feedback from the Development Advisory Committee, there were two specific proposals that were coming from the home builders. One was to vest system development charges at the time of land use, and the other was to delay collection of system development charges until a certificate of occupancy or final inspection. And the committee felt that the vesting did not actually do much for them, and that the delay would help them. And so staff has been looking at the delay collection. So this would be a more equitable system for council to bring that to council sometime in the next few months. We don't have a hard date yet, but that would probably be February at the earliest.
I guess just a follow-up to that as a question, what is the reasoning why they're not being brought at the same time?
Honestly, I think you heard from the first testimony tonight. The housing need is now, and it's not getting better from day to day. And so we don't see those things as necessarily being coupled. We do understand the concerns of the home builders, and we have been working to address them with the Development Advisory Committee and be able to bring those things to bear. But honestly, the CET is a real need now, and so we felt that it was ready and could come on its own.
So did work start on both of these streams of work at the same time?
No. The Development Advisory Committee meets quarterly. So in the summer quarter, we first broached the topic and brought it back in the fall meeting. So after the last feedback, there just hasn't been enough lead time to do that administrative back-end work. So for instance, in order to delay the collection of the fees, there's software changes that actually have to be made with the permitting software the city uses. And we have to use a third-party vendor to make those changes. And so the third-party vendor needs to look at how that would be structured, what the costs are, and we're just now getting back information on that that would give us, a better look at the timeline.
Thank you. Are there other questions of staff after the testimony? Council President Goodhouse?
You kind of hit basically the ones I was going to ask, just why not linking them together and why the delay in starting them. I know when we had the council meeting discussion, we were, at least myself, and I think there was some talk about looking at these both at the same time and making a decision both at the same time, that one would balance the other one out. And so I was a little surprised to see that only one was brought forward and not the other at the same time.
Any other questions?
Just to follow up on that, so if the CET takes effect January 1st, are we looking at 2 or 3 months before the SDC would come? I mean, what kind of lag time, or can you not really speak to that?
So
You said February, but
I don't want to commit our building department, who are not here, to a timeline. And informally, I think it probably could come February, maybe March, but I don't want to give that as a firm date, because community development is not planning is not the only involved in that, and it would involve finance, city attorney, others.
okay, thanks.
Other questions? All right, I will close the public hearing. Thank you, Mr. Warren. Council discussion and consideration of ordinance number 19-16. Councilor Anderson.
Well, I've been a proponent of the CET for a couple years, and been watching Bend very closely and how they've, the Housing Authority has been using their money. Up until now, we haven't had a bucket of money to look at any kind of projects, let alone very attractive affordable housing projects that come our way. So this will help. I do think that we could, it is obviously going to bump up the market rate. It's going to, the builders are going to pass this tax on to the consumers. So I think we could smooth the way for the builders with delaying the impact fees. I'm very confident of that. So yes, yes on this.
What's your perspective, since you made that comment at the end, what is your perspective about trying to get those closer in timing together, or do you think that's key or not?
I think, sooner the better, but if this takes effect January 1st, I think we're fine. We're going to have some permits coming in during that time, but for a couple of months, I don't think that's a big issue.
Okay. Council President Goodhouse?
I'm in support of the CET as well. As when we were discussing this back in the summer and we had the discussion, as I mentioned, I was surprised that this wasn't brought together. As Councilor Anderson said, that there's going to be, with the CET, there's going to be expense and builders will pass that on. And if we're trying to focus on affordable housing, we don't really want expenses to go up. So that was kind of the whole point of the SDC, conversation at the same time. And so my proposal on this would be to either hold this over so we could do these at the same time, or to pass this contingent on the SDC also being passed at the same time. If we're looking at a start date of January or February for CET, make that contingent where the SDC portion is done. The only way I can support this is seeing that balance of the two, as we discussed back then at the council meeting, of having both those together. I see that if we're doing that, it's not going to cost the city anything to delay the recovering the SDCs, and it's going to be a offset for the building community as far as homes or commercial or so forth like that. So I see these two being linked together and a decision together. I don't see making one decision without making the other one. So that would be my proposal, that, and I don't know legally how we would say that, but my proposal, if we wanted to pass it tonight, would be contingent on passing on the SDC deferment.
Okay. Other counselors' perspectives? Counselor Loop?
The affordable housing plan that we passed in the summer was incredibly important, and speaking to our first couple of speakers, it's something that has a huge impact in the city of Tigard. And I would disagree with Councilor Goodhouse, where I do think it's a cost to the city to continue to delay this. And so I'm hugely in support of what it can do, and so I would be in favor of passing it now, and I definitely am in support of looking at delaying collecting the SDCs, but I don't see these as together. These are two separate issues, and I think we can treat them as such. But I think this is too important. The CET is too important to continue to delay. So I would be in favor of passing it tonight.
But you're also in support of bringing...
I'm in support of
SDCs.
bringing it and looking at the SDCs. I just don't see these two as necessarily having to be done
Directly.
together.
Okay. Councilor Newton?
Yeah, I would agree. I think I'm a supporter of the CET because I think it is a key piece of funding our affordable housing programs. And there's a lot of programs in that plan, and so I would be reluctant to delay moving forward on it and having it take effect as quickly as it can. I'm also about having the ability for willing partners to be involved in doing some of the land banking things. Less enthused about the city getting in the building affordable housing, but I think there's a lot of really critical opportunities here. I support moving forward on the SDC exemption too, and I would just like to signal staff to move it along as quickly as you can. But I think this is broader than just although it's important, and I agree with the home builders, I think this is a much broader program, and I think it's important to get going now. So I would agree that we adopt it tonight and move as quickly as we can on the SDCs.
I definitely think moving the SDCs, or making the SDC, making the construction excise tax going into place contingent on getting the other part figured out would probably move it as fast as possible. Move the work on the SDC stuff. I guess I want to just ask questions about, I want to ask questions about the implementation date. Do we feel like this gives people enough time to plan? Having a January 1 implementation is one question. The other question I have is really about, I'm thinking about the missing middle housing and whether or not, like, we already don't have, like, there's not tons and tons of stuff that's happening, and we're already saying we're going to tax stuff that we want more of that hasn't even been built. And I guess fundamentally, I'm trying to figure out why we would implement a 50% CET on that, but maybe I'm on my own there. Anybody have any other thoughts on either of those things? No? Okay.
Are you asking why the exemption would be 50%?
Yeah, instead of less or none. I mean, like, what we're now saying we're going to we just spent a bunch of time trying to make code changes over the last couple of years to make sure that people can build this stuff because we want them to build it. And now I'm just struck by the fact that we're now going to say we're going to, before there's even been a big boom of doing any of that construction, that we're going to slap a CET on top of it. I guess to me that seems kind of odd, but I can live with it, I guess.
I agree. thing. I mean, it goes kind of in hand with my comment. I mean, if we're trying to promote more growth, more affordability, why are we taking some of the areas that could be affordable in that? I don't agree with that either.
Does somebody have an alternative proposal?
So you're referring to, I've seen your
It's
screen.
section, yeah, it's
You're referring to cottage.
section 5 of 3.90.050 exemptions. Cottage clusters, courtyard units, and quads as defined by Title 18.200 of the Tigard Community Development Code 2019 from 50% of the CET. Thank you, Mr. Warren. The remaining 50% is due and payable as provided in section 3.90.030C. This exemption's repealed, so that's the other thing. This wasn't mentioned. I know it was mentioned related to ADUs, but it looks like this is also, all of the missing middle is repealed July 31st of 2023, which maybe that's fine. I mean, it certainly would be time to revisit at that point. So that's the section I'm just questioning.
What would you like to see it?
Well, either 25% or 0, I don't know. If we're, I mean, again, we're trying to encourage this. And maybe it's not enough to matter. I mean, maybe it's not going to be a barrier.
I could live with 25% and then revisit it later.
I can as well.
Counselor Newton or Counselor Lube, thoughts?
I could live with 25% and have the sunset clause and have it revisited in 2023.
So, and in 2023, if the council didn't take action, it would go to 100%. I mean, that's my understanding of how it's reading, correct?
That would be my understanding.
City Attorney, am I correct about that?
So I think you actually want to exempt it from 75%?
Yeah.
In order to have 25% payable.
Correct. That would be the intent of the discussion. But we are correct that it would go to 100%, or it would go to 0% exemption. Is that your point?
Correct.
In
Right.
2023?
Upon expiration of the sunset, yes.
Okay.
I see the staff's logic, but I'm fine with 25% too, so.
Okay, so we're kind of, Council President Goodhouse?
Since everyone seems to be on board with looking at the SDCs, and for the timeline, I would like to see, I don't know with City Attorney, but how it could be proposed that we look at or contingent have the SDC discussion prior to implementation. If staff's thinking January, February, if we can accelerate that, or maybe we give an extra month and we make CET effective February 1st. But I'd like to see the SDC conversation at the same time.
Why don't you make a motion and hopefully include the change to 75% in Section 5 with your motion, and then we'll see if you have enough support to get a vote.
So I make a motion to approve Ordinance 19-16 with the change, and how is that worded?
So Section 5, the cottage
Check.
clusters court, the missing middle would
Change.
receive a 75%.
To change the Section 5 exemption to 75%, and to make this effective January 1st, contingent on the passage of the deferral on SDCs.
Is there a second? Okay, does someone else want to make a motion?
I move to approve ordinance number 19-16 with the amendment to Section 5 cottage clusters for 75% of the CET.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Further discussion?
Further discussion is that we do come back with the home builders and look at the delay of the impact fees
Okay.
as soon as possible.
And do you want to state when you expect that to happen?
I
from
would
a date
say,
perspective?
I would say by March 1.
Is that practical from a staff perspective? Okay. Further discussion? Yeah, we got a shaking yes head from Kenny. Sorry, just to narrate what we were all looking for there.
Or sooner.
Well, yeah, that'll be a no later than, I think, March 1. Any further discussion? Okay, City Recorder, please conduct a roll call vote.
So I just want to verify that ordinance 19-16 enacts a citywide construction excise tax with amending section 5 that the reduction is 75%. Councilor Lube?
Yes.
Councilor Anderson?
Yes.
Mayor Snyder?
Yes.
Council President Goodhouse?
Yes.
Councilor Newton?
Yes.
Okay, ordinance number 19-16 as amended is adopted. And thank you all very much. It's a lot of work, so I want to thank the community for your participation, thank staff for all the work that all of you have done, and we will move on to our next agenda item. Legislative public hearing, considered an ordinance amending Tigard Municipal Code 3.50 tax exemptions for nonprofit affordable housing. I will open the public hearing. Anyone that wants to offer testimony will be allowed to do so. There's a sign-up sheet at the front of the room that I don't think I have right now. If someone can grab that, that would be great. Mr. Warren, staff report.
Pardon us, we're having
Technical difficulties? Okay.
Mr. Warren, again, Associate Manager, Community Development. The ordinance before you would update the city's tax exemption for nonprofit managed affordable housing, and you've probably heard a little bit of testimony already on this. This is an item that has been in place since 1997. So the state enabled jurisdictions to exempt affordable housing developments from property taxes starting in 1991, I believe. Portland was the first city in the metro region to adopt it, and Tigard was the second. It has been an incredibly successful program and has been valuable to our nonprofit partners in the community. So, spoil too much of what I've got here, but I was off by a couple of years, going from memory. 1985 was passed. So it exempts only the city taxes. So each jurisdiction has to adopt, each taxing district has to adopt their own exemption. So, for example, as you know, on the property tax bill in the city of Tigard, our property taxes account for about 14 cents per dollar, with the remainder of those property taxes going to other taxing districts, such as Tigard Tualatin School District, Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue. And basically what the state said is that each of those taxing districts had to adopt the exemption for nonprofit-run affordable housing separately. However, if they could get approval from 51%, so if they can get a majority of the taxing districts to sign on for that exemption, then the full property tax bill is waived. And I believe all of our nonprofit affordable housing developments who currently take advantage of this program get the full tax exemption. So, like I said, we adopted in 1996, and in the intervening years, the state has tweaked this program several times. Our municipal code has not kept up to date with those changes in state law. It is important to note as well that Tigard Tualatin School District and Tigard more than 51% of the tax value. So generally, by going to those two taxing districts, the providers can get the full exemption. So the way that this program works under the municipal code and state law is that the nonprofits who want the tax exemption have to apply for each property on an annual basis. So we review those applications generally in February, I think, late February, early March, and we make a recommendation to council. And so we've seen, each year in the spring, a proposal for a resolution that approves the exemption for those properties. And for Tigard Tualatin School District, their practice has been to adopt the exemption annually on a per property basis. So what, I want to go to next here is the impact of these exemptions. So Community Partners for Affordable Housing, started here in Tigard, they have 4 properties that receive this exemption: Village at Washington Square, Greenberg Oaks, Knoll at Tigard, and then a single detached house, 4-bedroom. And so, they're getting right around 150 units worth of exemption there. And then Resident Resources gets an exemption for 118 units at Hawthorne Villa. There are some future properties that are likely to qualify for this tax exemption. Community Partners for Affordable Housing Red Rock Creek Commons would be eligible. Community Development Partners Development at 72nd Baylor would be eligible, and Northwest Housing Alternatives Senior Center Housing would also be eligible. So I'm going to highlight 2 of the key provisions that have changed in state law that we are updating with the proposed ordinance. ORS 307.540 now allows that the tax exemption can be extended to properties held for later development, and that means land banking. So that exemption is for up to SEPA, Community Partners for Affordable Housing, purchase Red Rock Creek Commons. They had to hold the property for a number of years while they assembled the funding stack to actually get it built. So each of those years, they were paying property tax on that land. The new exemption would allow them to apply to exempt that land while it's being held for that purpose. The other big provision is a clawback provision that allows the city to assess back taxes in the event that a property leaves affordability or it's not developed. So if SEPA had not developed Red Rock Creek Commons and they opted instead to sell it, then and they had received the property tax exemption, then they would be responsible for back taxes on that. So why do we want to extend the tax exemption to land banking? Well, as you heard, it lowers the holding costs for developers during the assembly of that financing stack. It allows developers to buy properties at lower costs. The cheapest time to buy land is right now. Tomorrow it's going to be more expensive. And so if a developer can lock in a piece of property now, while they assemble the funding stack, they're going to get it at a lower price than they would a couple years from now. It does support equitable housing in the Southwest Corridor, and it aligns with the land purchase goals of the Metro Regional Affordable Housing Bond passed in 2018. So as you know, there's a portion of that affordable housing bond that is a set aside for land purchases. So land purchases using that bond money would be then exempted from property taxes if the land is purchased in Tigard, which we think is a great enticement to bring land banking into Tigard with that metro money. So why the clawback provision? It's pretty straightforward. It protects the city in the event that a development leaves affordability or it's never developed, so that we can get those taxes.
So any questions? Again, we're only doing questions now, not discussion or debate. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Warren. And we will move on to public testimony. I have two people that have signed up. We'll have 3 minutes to speak. Please come up, state your name and address for the record. Sheila?
Sheila Fink, Community Housing Fund 3700 Southwest Murray in Beaverton. Just for the record, the tax exemption program has been very valuable. What you're looking at doing to update it will make it even more so, and will provide for some uses that it hasn't achieved in the past. So we heartily recommend that you make that decision tonight. And thank you very much for taking the time to work with staff and with other stakeholders through the various committees that have come up with these recommendations. And we appreciate the time and energy that's going into really making changes to help preserve and create some new affordability in the city so that all kinds of families can call it home. Thanks.
Thank you. Karine?
So I am Karina Rendies. I live at 9524 Southwest North Dakota here in Tigard, and I'm here in support of updating our existing tax exemption policy because it works and it helps maintain housing for those who might otherwise be displaced from our community. As a member of Unite Oregon, I'm really excited to be working with Proud Ground and Metro to hopefully bring land banking to our city. Because with a problem this big, with a housing crisis this big, we need every tool in the toolbox. This exemption works. It has helped nonprofits create and maintain affordable housing in Tigard, and extending the provisions in this ordinance to qualifying land banks only makes sense. As some of you probably already know, I'm also a practicing land use planner, and I think it's important that we we decide to move forward with things, and staff's done a great job of doing their due diligence on this. And again, this was an idea that was vetted by that affordable housing task force. So community stakeholders who work with housing our most vulnerable community members are in support of this, and there's just absolutely no reason not to adopt the revisions proposed in this ordinance tonight. Our community needs and deserves the chance to use all the tools possible to help us address this really big challenge in front of us. So I would urge you to go ahead and adopt this ordinance as well this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Warren, is there any response to testimony by staff? Okay. I will close the public hearing. We will move on to council discussion and consideration of ordinance number 19-17. Any discussion? Or a motion if there's no discussion?
I move to approve ordinance number 19-17.
I second that.
It's been moved and seconded. City Recorder, please read the number and title of the ordinance.
Ordinance number 19-17, an ordinance amending Tigard Municipal Code 3.50, nonprofit corporation low-income housing, to include tax exemptions for land banking and remedies for properties that leave affordability.
City Recorder, please conduct a roll call vote.
Councilor Lube?
Yes.
Councilor Anderson?
Yes.
Mayor Snyder?
Yes.
Council President Goodhouse?
Yes.
Councilor Newton?
Yes.
All right, ordinance number 19-17 is adopted unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on to item number 6, receive an update on local option levy planning. And I know we've got a whole team that's going to be working on this. So, City Manager Wine.
Mr. Mayor and Council, as our levy team comes forward to present tonight, I'm just going to make a couple of opening comments. The Council has a goal to seek, our goal, as you pursue your goal, to seek a local option levy of Tigard voters in May of 2020, has several elements to it. And our goal is to give you regular updates about the information that is coming forward, both from community outreach, from the Levy and Bond Task Force, about facilities planning, and we've done a community survey that has, we have some results to present to you tonight. So The levy team is here, and they each have just a brief presentation, and we'll close with DHM Research providing the survey research findings as well. A couple of just framing comments that I'd like to share with you. I'll just remind you that in the course of the year that we've mapped out for planning for a local option levy, we're in the second phase, which is the point at which you would be talking about how you would like to refine the levy scope. So our hope is that the information that you're getting tonight will cause you to think about the scope of the levy and how you might refine it if you choose to take it to voters. I'll remind you too, there's no action that's requested of you tonight, but if you decide to refer a levy to voters, that would be in the late January, February of 2020 timeframe. So we're not asking you to make any decisions about this tonight, but what we are hoping that you will do is take in some of this information and give us guidance about next steps between now and the point that you might refer if you choose to. The final thing that I think I'd ask you to think about, and is in our staff report, is that the survey results that you're going to see tonight indicate a low level of support for a local option levy by voters, and I know that you all have discussion that you want to have about that. I hope that you'll think about the criteria that the council want to consider to refer. Those could include whether or not you want to have, or whether or not we've had sufficient time to communicate about a levy to the public, explaining and educating about the city's budget and whether adequate time has been made to establish that, whether the proposal is clear and defined in a way that illustrates the community benefits or benefits of the levy to the community. You have said in the past, and past councils have said, that your wish, if you decide to refer, is to go with unanimous support of the council. And then our recommendation to you as staff is that a voter survey should show strong support in the 40% range, and support of over 50, and better yet 60% of support, for us to recommend that you would be recommended to refer a levy to voters. So I think what I'm saying to you is, as you consider the survey results tonight, please think about all of those dimensions as we head toward January and February. So those are just some overview comments, but you'll be hearing information about what's been evolving since the last month when we updated you last in September. With that, I'm going to hand it to Nadine Robinson about facilities planning.
Good evening, I'm Nadine Robinson. I'm the Central Services Director, and I'm here to talk a little bit tonight about the facilities project for the police department. So we have contracted with FFA Architecture and Interior, and our scope with them included building on our prior reports to confirm the space needs for the department. We also have heard that the police department we would be able to add a second story to that. And that's kind of one of those urban legends that you hear going around for years, and yet we had never really had the opportunity to confirm that. So we wanted to take the time now as part of this to see if it would be practical for us to potentially build that. The third thing that we had them look at was our facilities condition assessment. As you remember, we completed that in 2016. We've done work with that, but in addition to that, we've also had our ADA transition plan go into it, so we wanted to add information with that, and then also just to see if there are any kind of big needs that have come up since that timeline. And I'll mention one a little bit later. So the next part of the project for them was investigating available alternative sites in Tigard. They were able to do that. And then probably one of the more fun parts of the project was just looking at the adjacency planning and putting that together. So what we've heard, the way the project started out is that FFA Architecture met with representatives from each of the divisions in the police department. So we had a lot of input face-to-face in terms of what staff were feeling they really needed in a new facility. In addition to that, FFA provided a survey to the department. We had really good response to that, and we felt like we had a pretty solid idea of what people are looking for. So not surprisingly, additional space across the board. Everybody was identifying that, and they really felt like that was needed to be more efficient, and they expressed a desire to all be together. And again, that kind of went to the idea of being able to be more efficient. Security was a big deal. Like through the survey, that was the number one thing, that we were able to provide a location that's secure, that included parking, and that our staff were safe coming to and from work and when we were on vacation. The second thing was the police department and being able to add the second floor. And so we have confirmed that we actually can. The building was built back in the 80s to allow that. However, even though it's feasible to go up, the police department is considered an essential facility. And so seismically, the upgrade that would need to be done to add a second or to a third floor would be prohibitive, and then square footage wise trying to meet our needs. So we would probably more likely than not need to actually add on to the building as well as doing that. And then we looked at the sites available there. The sites that currently are available, we looked at ones that are in the Triangle area, and then also Commercial Center off of 217. And they're not optimal locations, to be honest. And so we've looked at things more closely, and we have feelers out at this point to see if there would be interest in selling property with that. And then with our facilities condition, like I said, we've added ADA requirements, but I think probably the biggest thing that we haven't talked about in the past are the sewer issues that we're having. And just this realization that for us really to correct those, we would need to go through the police department to be able to do that. And the latest estimate that our facilities people have given us is that it could be up to $2.5 million project. So again, all of those things go toward, do you just start over when it comes to a facility, or do you at least have it not occupied when you try and make those kind of repairs? So with the programming for the police department, it included police operations, community space, emergency management, and then some IT support. So that would be having like our servers and that kind of thing in the police department. So if we had a natural disaster, that we would be able to have a place that our data would be safe. The results of the programming indicate that we need a facility that is almost 50,000 square feet. The exterior needs that would include parking for police vehicles and for employee vehicles would be close to 75,000 square feet. So the total site requirements would be at least 2 acres. So our next steps. We're evaluating facility needs overall, and we're looking at a larger project to determine whether the police department should be part of a larger civic center or if it should be an independent project. So that is currently moving, and we hope to finish that by the end of the year. So at the end of that project, we would anticipate coming back with both options so that council could determine which path they would like us to take, and if the police department would be standalone or it would be going with a larger project. Any questions on that, please?
Yeah, I think it'd be smart to do questions as they come by topical area. Okay.
Just real
Counselor
quick,
Newton?
I'm sorry, I missed the date that you were thinking you would come back with that last piece of information.
We're still shooting for the
Okay.
end of the year.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions of Director Robinson? Okay. We'll move on.
All right, good evening, Kent Wyatt, Communications Manager. I want to give you a recap of some of the communication efforts and outreach that we've done. Really broken down into two areas, some of the in-person engagement that many of you, all of you, have been a part of at some point. I think a couple of key things to stress here is our communication and outreach efforts didn't stop on May 15th, 2018, when the last levy failed. And actually, we kind of evolved our communication style and our storytelling in the lead up to that levy, and have continued to do that throughout the last 6 to 12 months. And really what that means is continuing to be authentic and timely in our communication, and also responding to what we heard in the last levy from focus groups about what they didn't hear from us that they wanted to. And part of that really was getting a better understanding of what the city does. In this case, what does police do? What's the importance of that? How does that fit into the picture? So we've really taken a all hands on deck approach. As you can see, some of the numbers up there in the last year or so, 94 events, either city staff or council has attended. Some of those pretty big events, Tino Fest, the Street Festival, Street Fair were big. Police Open House also drew a lot of folks there, especially in getting that hands-on experience in touring the building, but also talking to officers and seeing what some of their challenges were. I think it's important that council has set the tone that they're willing to go anywhere and everywhere to talk about the levy. We've had people at coffees, neighborhood meetings, neighborhood barbecues. So I think all of that has contributed to getting the message out about the importance of policing in Tigard. On our digital engagement, so we can't reach everybody in person, although we would like to. We also refined our digital approach through feedback from the Committee for Community Engagement, surveys that were received, and also focus groups that we did post the last levy. So we really kind of refined what people wanted to hear and how they wanted to hear it. One of those ways they wanted to hear it was through videos. Issue or produced a number of videos recently, the most recent being the Minutes Matter video, but we kind of started this drumbeat back at the State of the City in 2019 with the focus. Officer Wakeham's interview with the mayor is starting to set the tone for some of the facility needs here in Tigard. The mayor has talked about it a number of times in his columns, and also something completely new this year was the city report card, which went out to all utility billing customers, and also was included in Tigard Life, which we received a number of comments and feedback on, but I think most importantly in that, there was a big focus on response time and calls for service on that report card. So contributing to getting the message out about policing and where it stands right now in Tigard. What we've done, you heard about a survey that we did regarding safe routes. And you heard those results and had that discussion, and you had a number of council discussions about this, about the levy, about a potential levy, and as I mentioned, the open house. One thing that we've continued to communicate and stress since the performance audit was released was the findings in the performance audit and the recommendation that additional officers are needed in the police department to kind of back up what we've been hearing internally. So the audit, I think, has drawn attention to some of that need for additional resources in the police. And lastly, what we've heard and kind of our takeaways is probably the most important slide for us. You can read the takeaways and see kind of what we've gleaned from our outreach, but almost more importantly is how do we take this feedback and move forward? And one of the things that we've come upon is just to have more conversations and more names and faces of our police officers, what they do, why they do it, how they got involved, and why policing is so meaningful to them. Whether it's a levy or just with recruitment of police officers, I think it's important to start putting a face behind some of our officers, which you saw a little bit in the Minutes Matter video in the 15 calls that we responded to. and then with Officer Wakeham in the State of the City video. We do have a number of ways to get this through and out into the community. We are planning for a couple citywide mailers to provide information on police services, to highlight some of the videos that we've done that showcase what our officers are dealing with on a daily basis. And we also have learned a lot, like anything else. We've incorporated messaging that we've heard from the task force, the levy task force, the survey results that you'll hear in a little bit. And then once again, our CCE committee has been very open and honest about what they think we're doing well and what we're not doing well. So it's very much a fluid process, and we're adjusting as we hear that feedback and incorporating it into our outreach. The communications or outreach to this point.
Thank you.
Assistant City Manager Nyland returns to her seat. I forgot one element of my staff report that I wanted to let you know about. There is an important piece of information that the council will want to hear about, and that is what the component costs are and total costs of the levy are, and what the resulting levy rate will be. And that wasn't prepared for tonight's presentation, but we're going to be bringing it to you next week. So I know that that's something that you also want to discuss, and we've got it queued up for next week's agenda.
Yeah, it's kind of,
I know
it's kind of
it's a
hard
missing
to
piece,
do
right.
one without the other, but yeah, we'll do our best.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Kathy Nyland, the Assistant City Manager, and I'm here to talk about the Levy and Bond Task Force. As you may recall, the task force was created and convened in 2017. We reconvened the task force earlier this year in August 2019. We had 12 returning members, and you appointed 5 additional members to finish out the vacancies. The Levy Bond Task Force met 3 times, August 22nd, September 18th, and then again 2 weeks ago on October 16th. In those 3 meetings, we actually covered a broad range of topics. We spent a lot of time really looking back on the efforts from the previous levy and looking at what we could have done differently, lessons learned, how we can apply those lessons to this proposed package. We examined and really discussed the proposed 2020 levy package. We had a brief overview about city finances and steps the city has taken. We talked extensively about outreach and engagement, touched upon the safe routes to schools, police operations, spent a lot of time on messaging, what resonated with that group, and really how to keep it positive, and we sampled some ballot titles. So in those 3 meetings, again, a lot was accomplished. The ending recommendation was the group, pretty much in consensus, agreed upon some guidance principles, and they sent you a letter I think you received last week on October 29th. And first and foremost, all the task force members said, whatever you chose to decide, they would support. That being said, there were some themes that emerged. People felt the May 2020 ballot measure, that timeline was not recommended. The group felt that more time was needed to really clarify what the package was, the benefits people would receive, and really to establish a need. The group felt moving in the direction of having a sole focus was highly recommended, and in this instance, that sole focus was going to be police services. We had quite a conversation around whether to include safe routes to schools or not. That was kind of mixed, but the group landed on a sole focus package. The group also really wanted to shore up a path forward for success. So rather than focusing on a specific date of when we would greenlight moving forward, they wanted, their recommendation was to really spend time addressing perceptions of how the city spent its money, kind of educating and explaining how city budgets worked, and again, going back to establishing a need. That was one of the things they pointed out, much like the internal conversations of when you have a high satisfaction rate, how do you then go around and create this narrative of why we need this package. And the last thing they really recommended was spending time on building those partnerships that would help advance move forward. We would have a high chance of success. So again, that letter was sent to you last week, and that's the high level. We do have a few members here tonight. Thank you again for all the time you have given in this conversation and providing some really great feedback and some solutions, I think. So that is my report on the task force as the staff liaison.
Any questions? Okay.
So with that, I'd like to invite our research team from DHM to join us. As the council will recall, we let a contract for survey and research services for up to 3 surveys. The purpose, and we've done one. So the results of that survey are ready for tonight. The purpose of this first survey was to understand the satisfaction with police services generally, test messaging to try to figure out whether and where there was voter support or opposition for a levy measure, and overall begin to gauge voter support for a local option levy. So I'd like to welcome John and Tony from DHM who are here tonight, and there is a presentation of theirs that's on the desktop, if you wouldn't mind queuing it up.
What's up? Let me just say, I'm John Horvick, Political Director at DHM Research.
And I'm Tony Alperino, Project Manager at DHM.
It's a pleasure to be here, be able to share with you what we've heard from voters here in Tigard, and to be working with the city of Tigard again. It's been a very good relationship we've had the last several years, an opportunity to work with staff and to hear from the citizens of this community. We're going to walk through the recent research results as soon as we get them shown up here. I want to say that we're going to walk through sort of a modified version of the full report that's been provided to the city. In the full report, there's going to be more details about some key demographic differences that you'll probably be interested in. But in the interest of time tonight, I wanted to focus on the overall results. So this was a survey just sort of to ground everybody, what we attempted to do. What we sought to measure voter support for a 5-year City of Tigard local option levy for police patrol neighborhood safety. As was said earlier, we tested a lot of different types of messages to communicate to voters about the benefits and perhaps some concerns that voters might have about the levy as well, to not only help with communications, but to give a realistic sort of view to decision makers about how support maybe holds up or doesn't in light of different messages that are going to be out there in the community. We also sort of looked at some other issues that might be on the ballot at the same time, including the Washington County Public Safety Levy, to find out whether that support helped or hindered the effort here in Tigard. Finally, we looked at some alternative funding measures, including a bond for police as well. But big picture here, we wanted to look at whether or not Tigard voters would support this public safety levy. Methodology certainly can answer any questions that you have, but the big important things to know right now is that it's a representative survey of Tigard voters. We sampled 300 voters in the community. It has a margin of error of 5.6% for a sample size that large. Things might not always add up to 100%. You do a little rounding, might be off by a percentage one way or the other. So I just wanted to, for the presentation, where I tell you what we found, and I'm going to show you the numbers afterwards, and then we can talk about it more in Q&A, so hit it a few times. But here's what to look for in the numbers that I'm going to show coming up. One is that voter sentiment in Tigard remains positive. It has been in all the times that we've tested. It is here again today. That's both a positive and negative story to tell when it comes to passed-in levies, but certainly reflective of the good work that's been done in the community because people are satisfied. People are also satisfied with police and public safety in Tigard, and a majority of residents feel as safe now as they have in the recent past. So all sort of positive characteristics of the city, and we'll sort of give you the specific numbers in a moment here. There, as was said earlier, support for the levy is lower than we typically would want to see in making recommendations to go forward. We'll show you specifically, where that is, and I'll talk a little bit about how it compares to other ballot measures. Concerns about housing affordability are high here, and we certainly have seen it spike throughout the Portland Metro region and really across the state of Oregon. That has weighed down positive sentiments in communities across Oregon, and we see it in sort of right direction, wrong track numbers that we'll show here in Tigard as well. It has also made people more cost sensitive or more selective about the types of measures that they will only say yes to. And those affordability measures really do cut across all sorts of demographic groups. It's not just coming from one place. So there's some things to, one more sort of slide here before we get into the numbers. One positive is that support does increase throughout the survey. So from the first, we tested it 3 times, and support did move in a more positive direction. Still not to a majority support or a level that we'd like to see to predict success in the near future, but it did move in that direction. And we tested 9 different messages in support of the measure. They all do very well. Some do especially well, but there is a whole suite of different measures or messages and statements, reasons to support that voters will respond positively towards. And we did find in the survey that knowing that a small portion of the levy is dedicated to safety improvements along school routes does boost support for the levy. I know that was just discussed a moment ago, and we found that here. So general perception of the city of Tigard. I'm going to walk you through kind of just what it was for a survey participant. We did start off by asking that sort of classic question, all things considered, is Tigard headed in the right direction or things off on the wrong track? We've asked this question in recent surveys in Tigard since 3 times since 2017. You can see that the current number was 65% right direction. The wrong track number just 17%. It is down a little bit from its high in 2017. We have seen right direction numbers decline in many communities across the state over the last few years. Each community is unique, but the primary driving factor has been concerns about affordability, cost of living, especially around homelessness. These numbers compared to other communities still are robust, quite strong. So 65% is a good number in any conditions. It is a little bit lower than it's been in the past, but you should also take it as a sign that residents of Tigard are quite happy with the direction. Now, that is a good thing. That's what you're trying to deliver on. But it also can be a sign that there's not a lot of, or a strong sense of urgency around taking steps to increase funding to address a problem. We asked about satisfaction with public safety in Tigard. It's a question that we asked both in 2017 survey and a 2019 survey. Now, if we look at the top line number, if we look at total satisfaction with public safety, it is exceptional. In 2017, 96% said that they were satisfied. This go around, it was 92%. You really can't get any higher than that. You're really bumping up against the ceiling. We do break down the question a little bit, and we ask if you're very satisfied or somewhat satisfied. And there we do see a little bit of a decline. In 2017, 65% said that they were very satisfied with public safety. Now it's 38%. So that the intensity has dropped a little bit. The overall sort of positive versus negative is certainly still clear, but the intensity of the satisfaction has declined. And that's something to pay attention to in years to come. Another question we asked, and we asked these questions, this gives a sense of, like, is this a problem that voters think needs to be addressed? And so we asked, is Tigard less safe, more safe, or about the same? In the last few years, you can see that the majority, 55%, say it's about the same. That it's holding steady, and we saw just a second ago that they're quite satisfied with public safety. It's 21%, so certainly minorities say that it's less safe, but it is notable that's twice as large as the more safe category. So again, these numbers overall are quite positive. They speak to residents being satisfied overall in public safety, maybe speak to a lack of sense of urgency, but there are a couple points in here, the twice as likely to say less safe than more safe, and that strong satisfaction with public safety on the decline. All right, that's just setting the table. We did then ask, you going to support the levy or not? And like I said earlier, we asked it 3 times. We asked it first using language that would be very, very close to what would be on a ballot title. So, following the rules, the word count, looking at past titles to get in, to try to write it as closely as it would be on the ballot. And we did that. 38% said that they would support the measure, 54% opposed. So 38% is well below that 60% threshold that we looked for. It's also notable that 31% said that they were certain to vote against it, compared to the 16% who said that they were certain to vote for it. We really want to see those flip. So one of the things about asking just the ballot title is that voters might scratch their head and say, well, what is it going to cost me? And so we follow up with that and tell voters that for the typical house in Tigard, it would be about $125 per year. You can see with that information, support increased, not a lot, but it did increase from 38% to 42%. Voters, when they just hear a levy rate, they may have a difficulty sort of translating to that what that means. And it suggests here that maybe some voters were overestimating how much it might cost them. So we did see a slight bump. Again, still well below that threshold that we'd like to see, but moving in a positive direction. We tested 9 different messages to support the levy, and I think it's 6 or 7 messages in opposition to the levy. Just so you know, in terms of construction, the 2 were rotated, so half the participants would have heard the support messages first, and half would have heard the opposition messages first, and then the individual statements are randomized as well. So there's always a chance that how the order that you present information may bias, and we try to mitigate that as best as we can by rotating the sections and randomizing the questions. Of the 9 messages that we tested in support, and we really worked closely with staff to develop these, 7 of them had at least 70% of our respondents say that they were good or very good reasons to support the measure. Okay? So it is not as if voters sort of reject the notion, right? They heard that there were reasons to say yes to this. And we sort of broke down these messages into 2 tiers. So about half messages were sort of our highest level and half just a step down. And to sort of organize these into themes, the next slides will do that. One of the themes is just staffing needs. So we told them that there's not enough police officers to respond to multiple emergencies, and that hiring additional officers would help shorten versions of the full question, but those are the main themes. And you can see that 76% said that, gosh, we would like to be able to have enough police officers respond to multiple emergencies. That's a good reason to support the measure. And 72% said yes, hiring additional officers to keep up with population growth is a good reason to support the message as well. Real strong things you can take out to the community. Another theme was having sufficient police officers to deal with mental health and homelessness issues. So you can see that having officers with advanced training to de-escalate crisis problems with those who are dealing with mental health or mental illness, 70% said that's a good reason. Hiring new officers to work full-time on homelessness issues, 72% said that's a good reason. Another top-tier message had to do with safe routes to school. That is an element that is a potential to put into a levy, and 71% said those sorts of benefits would be a good reason to support the levy. All right, so there is a lot of strong messages that you could use. The second tier, they're all above 60%, so they're all still good too and be appropriate to use with individual audiences or as supporting of a top-tier message. But they have to do with enhancing community policing, hiring additional officers to reduce response times. As you can see, they're hiring officers to reduce response times is not quite as strong messages as to deal with population growth. Protecting business investments in homes, and providing school resource officers to keep people safe. That was the least performing message, but still 60%. So a lot of positive sorts of things you can take to the community. We did test messages to pose as well. We tested 7 of them. Only 2 of the 7 that we tested had the same sort of strength of agreement as our parole messages did. The reality is, in a campaign, a no message is more powerful than a yes message. They pass so equally, and you don't need as many. And so that two really do pop on the opposition side. Tells me if there were a campaign against the levy, they would have some clear sort of things that they could say to get people to pay attention and to listen to their perspective. The two strongest performing ones are increasing property taxes will make housing even less affordable and make it harder for families. Affordability is always, did I do that? Okay. Affordability, whenever we test this, is frequently one of the most effective opposition messages to any type of tax increase. It's become more powerful in recent years as people have shown growing concerns about cost of living in the Portland metro area, specifically around housing affordability. Property taxes, housing affordability, people make a strong connection there. And you can see that the second best performing opposition messages is property taxes are already too high, we just can't afford to pay more. And again, you could write that into any survey. It's typically one that's going to do well. We see it's, 71% and 39% say it's a very good reason. So affordability and property tax rates, messages to communicate for an opposition campaign, and they do as well as any of the poll messages. We did test some other ones. City leaders keep asking us for money. That has to stop. That gets some majority support, but you can see that the support, or sort of people saying it's a good reason to vote no, it does decline a little bit. As well as there are more important funding measures in the ballot next year. A majority do say that that's a good reason, but it does decline a bit. And ones that get less than 50% are not, or I think they're all less than 50% here. One I think should take as positive. I don't trust the city of Tigard to spend funds wisely. That's less than 50%. There are plenty of police patrols, public safety presence now in Tigard. We don't need more, less than 50%. So there might not be a sense of urgency, but then and the things in Tigard are just fine. We don't need more government services again, well below 50%. So those aren't messages an opposition campaign would probably use. And I think that they're indications that voters probably are feeling satisfied with the community and trusting leadership. So after we give these messages to folks who say, now that you've heard more, what do you think? You can see that support is now, 43% after they've heard these messages. So it has moved. I think we started at 38%, now 43%, gained 5 percentage points. And the certain, we gained 8 percentage points from 16 to 24. So it is moving in the direction that perhaps would hope, but still well below a threshold that we typically would want to see. In the full report, you can see all sorts of demographic breakdowns to see where support is strongest and where it's weakest. But none of that's going to change the overall story. A couple other things we did in this survey, just to give a little more context, is we did ask about this safe routes to school, and we said that only 2 or 3 cents out of every 46. Does that make you more likely to support the measure or less likely to support the measure? And knowing that it was only a small amount, but that it's there, 55% said that would make them more likely to support the measure. So it seems to be somewhat helpful to get people to yes, not overwhelmingly so, but it does nudge them in that direction. And then some alternative funding measures and approaches to share. So one of the issues we sort of know is, depending on the timing of the measure if it goes to the voters, is that Washington County is considering a public safety levy as well. And we did inform voters that that could be the case, and we said, well, if they're both on the ballot at the same time, what would you plan to do? Well, 44% said that they would still vote yes for the city of Tigard levy. You either vote yes on both or yes on Tigard, no on Washington County, but say yes to Tigard, which, to remind you, 43% said that they would vote for the Tigard. So it seems to be a very little impact. If you were going to vote yes for Tigard, you pretty much guaranteed to vote a yes, even if they were both on the ballot at the same time. So it's some indication if they were on the ballot at the same time that it's not weakened by that fact. So that is a consideration for you going forward. And then we asked, well, another possibility is to include a bond measure. So it could be a levy on public safety as well as a bond to build a new facility. The bond support 40%, support 50%, opposition again. Really want to pay attention to those certains. 31% certain to vote no, 15% certain to vote yes. And then we said, well, there's some timing considerations if a bond and a levy were something that voters would want to support. I said, well, what's your recommendation? And we said, well, one recommendation might be neither the bond or the levy now, and just 27% said that. 60% said put something on the ballot. A levy and a bond both now, 23%. A levy now and a bond later, 23%. So there, you get to 46% with a levy. And a bond now and a levy later, just 14%. So there is some appetite to have this continuous conversation. It's not overwhelming at 60%, but it also wasn't a rejection, which is notable considering that support for the levy overall was less than 50%. It doesn't mean the voters don't want to have this conversation necessarily. And then we said, well, another consideration is, should we do smaller asks, multiple over time, or one ask that's larger at once? And here we got some pretty clear direction, 50% versus 22%. 50% said ask voters only once to fund a building that includes all services now, and don't ask for multiple tax increases over time. You know, it's twice as much as ask voters to fund a police building now and come back for other needs later. There's different ways, I think, to interpret that data, to be frank. One could be, you know, guidance from the voters about just the size of package that they would like to be put in front of them. Another could be just an expression of tax fatigue that could come from not only Tigard, but Washington County and the state of Oregon, and just saying, you know, given the choice of one or many, I want one. And so it could be more about the number than the size. But there is, you know, on the balance, 50% versus 22 is really clear. So staff asked us to answer a couple additional questions outside of the survey. One was just around timing, and sometimes we use PowerPoint. Oh, there they are. There they are. They popped up. Is to think about which election cycle, and with primaries especially, can be a lot of variability in turnout. Keep in mind that Oregon has closed partisan primaries, so for president and governor and legislative races, registered Democrats vote for Democrats and Republicans vote for Republicans. Non-affiliated and third-party voters don't get a vote in those partisan primaries. They get a vote in everything else, of course. But because of that, we see fairly wide variations across years between Democrats and Republicans in turnout. So if we look at these primary elections, this is Washington County data, not specific to Tigard, but the trend would hold up in Tigard as well. Look at 2008 is probably a good place to start. That's when we had a contested presidential primary between Barack Obama and 2008. It was Hillary Clinton at that point, I suppose. Contested primary, and you can see there's 56% Democrats in the ratio, just 31% Republicans. In 2008, that primary is pretty much wrapped up on the Republican side, and a lot more enthusiasm for Democrats to turn out and vote than there was Republicans. So if you think on balance, it's a 15 percentage point advantage for Democrats. Compared to that to 2004, where it was a 2% Republican advantage in the primary. Turnout was just overall lower that year as well. Democrats tend to be more supportive of tax increases than Republicans. It certainly is true in this survey as well. And so if we're thinking ahead to 2020, the May primary is hard to predict at this point. It is more likely than not, I'd say, that there'll still be contested Democratic primary at the presidential level, and that would likely say that Democrats are going to want to turn out and cast a ballot in that race. It's very unlikely to be a contested Republican primary, and so Republicans may be less enthusiastic to participate in those elections. That might indicate that a May election would be more favorable. Overall turnout in these sorts of elections is less important than the mix of voters. And so that's a real possibility. Another possibility is the Democratic primary wraps up early and it's not competitive come May, and that's a advantage, such as it is, disappears. I looked at the general election as well, and probably the thing to pay attention to is the yellow bars. That's not affiliated in the third party. So this is general election. You can see the Democrats have had a large advantage in the last 3 presidential elections as well. The non-affiliated voters increased substantially. If we look at 2008 as a benchmark again and go backwards, they had a 15 percentage point advantage in the primary, just a 10 percentage point advantage in the general. That sort of shows how much that presidential race really does impact what turnout is. We don't know what the primary will be like, what the general will be like, but those are some indicators you might want to consider as you're thinking about timing. Another thing that our staff asked us is, well, can you come up with some examples of other communities that had polling like this that went on to be successful? And to be honest, we struggled to find something. 2 relatively close examples, at least I think were pointed out. One is in Salem. In the city of Salem, we've done public opinion work for them as well the last several years, including asking about a police facility there. In 2016, we did a survey for them, and the police bond had a 52% support in a survey several months before the election. It ended with 48% support at the actual ballot. They went back in 2017 and asked voters again for support for a police bond to build a facility there. Ended up getting 62% of the ballot. In 2016, the ask was $82 million. In 2017, the ask was $62 million. So, it was polling higher than Tigard's, the survey results here. But they saw that loss and made a fairly substantial adjustment to what they asked. From a public policy perspective, I can't really speak if that was a good choice or not, but voters responded. Something that's closer to home, to here in Tigard, but not public safety. We did several rounds of survey work for the city of Portland around what became their gas tax. Originally, they were looking at a street fee. The street fee always sort of pulled in sort of high 40s, low 50s range. Not a number that council felt comfortable taking to voters. They did ultimately decide to switch and move to a different mechanism altogether, to the gas tax, which passed at the ballot 52%. So they took that polling number that wasn't as strong as they had hoped and changed the mechanism and ended up being able to get to 52% in the election. Then there are a couple other examples that polled basically just where Tigard's at right now. In Jackson County in 2018, they had a bond, or were considering a bond for a county jail. It was in the low 40s, and county commissioners decided it wasn't the right time, and they decided not to put it on the ballot. Neighbors in Tualatin, they looked at a civic center, potential bond, also polled in the low 40s, and they made a choice not to move forward at that time as well. Typically, when things increase, they start with a number that's in the mid-50s to 60s, and then they get up to 65, 70% at the ballot in light of that there's no opposition campaign running against it. Things that start in the sort of 40s to 50s tend not to pass, especially if there is an opposition campaign against it. I think that's, just some other things you might want to consider about if you want to pursue this, and thinking about additional things you might ask voters. We only tested $1 amount here. And so there could be cost sensitivity. It could be that if you drop the dollar amount, again, I don't know from a policy perspective if that's a good idea or not, but it's something at least worth considering. Alternative packages as well. We tested really a police levy and asked about specific things, including hiring police officers, dealing with mental health and homelessness. Perhaps there's other sorts of suites of services around public safety that voters respond more positively towards. You could do additional research just because your staff is continuing to do good outreach and communication with the community, just to know where things move. Are they moving in a positive direction over time? Measuring that could help you make a decision. And then there's also the possibility of always doing qualitative research as well. And I think some of this is already being done, so this might be redundant, but with your key stakeholders in the community who have influence with other community members. So your business leaders, your neighborhood associations, active members on Nextdoor, they really do. We heard in the focus groups a couple of years ago that they really did have influence on folks when they saw conversations on there and understanding who's active in some of those online forums and understanding more of their perspective might be something to do as well. So with that, that's the data and some additional considerations for you to consider. And with any time we would like, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Council President Goodhouse.
And on the note, I just checked my phone, and if anyone wants to know, the King City levy is passing 60 to 39 for their safety levy. So since we're on the topic, one question I had is how was it determined which and what the saturation in each precinct was kind of determined for that? Because looking at the results from last time and looking how they do it, and also looks like even though it's a sliver and it's kind of growing, there also the precinct of 411 didn't really get touched, and that's a growing area out there. So just kind of what was looked at, why some other ordinance weren't really touched, and
Sure, we simply just look at the registered voters in those different precincts and did our best to match the percentages that are there.
okay. Because some of them are looking at, and I think you're maybe doing a little math a little more. I was looking at the numbers from last time, and last time the precinct 402 was the worst performing precinct we had there, and that was one of the highest surveyed areas. So I don't know, sometimes those might take into account, sometimes it might skew maybe a result where you...
Worst performing in that it voted...
So when we had...
No on the levy.
No on the levy, so we had, there was only 36% yes and 63% no in precinct 402, but then we, of the surveyed, we had about 26% of the survey that was done in that precinct. So I wonder how that plays into the overall and may skew the results where you take a look at maybe a low performing precinct compared to maybe what the other ones may bring up or change it.
You're bringing up something, so we aim to represent of registered voters. And so to be proportional in the community based upon who is registered to vote. In the crosstabs that you have, we also have some columns that show vote frequency. And so voters who voted more frequently were actually somewhat more supportive of the levy than those who voted less frequently. And that could be something that you want to consider as well. If a precinct turned out more in a past election, that might be a precinct that it's not biased so much as you'd want to think about, well, in this case, we saw that likely voters were more likely to say yes. And if likely voters are, concentrated in an area, you may want to think about that. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question or not. But
I guess it's something, and I kind of doing the math, I think there was a couple of percents more on this compared to what was turned out in the last election. So I think that last election, probably about 24% turned out in that one, and this one about 26. So I just wonder how that may throw off the overall numbers when we're trying to consider and see if it may.
24 to 26%.
In a sample of 300, that's not very much.
Okay. Yeah. And so I just want to take
It's worthwhile looking at representation, and certainly geography is part of it.
One of the things that I noticed, and I guess I'll comment on since you already touched on it, is that I think one of the most important, I know you're looking at wanting to talk to registered voters. Mm-hmm. For the politicians in the room, we care about people who actually vote.
Sure.
And so what I was struck by that you've not really mentioned is that the 3 of 4 and 4 of 4 voters, which is sort of like who we actually care about, and are much more likely to vote in primary elections of even years, which is what we're talking about, that the post-test results for them were actually above or at 50%, sure, correct? Yeah. Can you comment on that? Because to me, that's one of the most striking numbers in here.
Sure. I mean, yes, likely voters were more likely to say yes, and after you give them lots of messages, pro and con, they got a slight majority to over 50%. I will say turnout in Oregon is quite high. In a May primary election, turnout will probably be close to 70%. If you went in a general election, it would probably be in 85-ish %. And so those infrequent voters at this moment in a contested presidential primary election And I think a general election is going to have intense interest. Voter turnout's going to be very, very high, so you're going to have a big mix of those infrequent voters as well as you will those frequent voters. If this were on the ballot tonight, right, you really want to hone in on those 3s and 4s. 2020, I think, is going to be a different situation where you're going to have high turnout in both those elections, especially among partisans.
Yeah. And on that topic, though, I mean, but then you get into another topic where you might have the turnout where you get those people voting for the top of the ballot, but how much down ballot is so maybe those 3 and 4s will still go down ballot, but I mean, and I don't know how to tell or if you even have this, but then how would the down ballot be for those 1 of 4s and 2 of 4s?
You do see some drop off, of course. I don't know how to. It's quantifiable. I just don't know what that number is.
Because sometimes you get those that don't very often. They're like, okay, here's what's on. I see this. I watched the debate, so I'll do this. But then, heck, I don't know what these things are.
Sure,
so
that is something to take in consideration.
So that's where I think that 3s and 4s are good to look at because at least those will.
Okay. Other questions? Oh, you have comments, Councilor Newton?
Could we go back to the slide where you talk about messaging?
Sure.
New.
I'll sit back. Pro or con?
No. I mean the alternative, toward the end. Yeah, toward the end.
Tell me where to stop here.
Oh, yeah. Where you're talking about testing new messages. It's like the second to the last slide.
This one?
No, it had bullet points.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
This one.
Yeah.
So I'm interested, quite frankly, because of this is important to me. I really think we need to try to move forward on this. I mean, it's really important to me. But I'm interested because the conversations that I'm having on an individual level, when I have an opportunity to explain what we're talking about, people lean in. Mm-hmm. They feel compelled. Mm-hmm. When we talk about 8 to 10 officers or something like that, oh yeah, I like the police. I don't know if I want to pay more. But when I started talking at the coffee that I had, that Officer Mace was great and attended with me, and I talked about, in particular, the growth that we can't keep up with, the training that officers would benefit from for addressing mental health issues, and some of these things you list here, they're leaning in and they're compelled to be supportive, and they're asking Officer Mace questions about that, and they see a benefit. When you're saying 8 to 10 officers, they're like, well, that just sounds like more. So the reason I'm interested in this slide is, I'm just one of 5, but I'm interested in doing some more polling to see how we shift those messages to something that's a little more compelling. I was surprised, quite frankly, they weren't critical of the fact that, they didn't say things like, well, why does the city keep growing? I thought we might get comments like that, but they didn't. They were very concerned. Also concerned that we don't have the capacity to respond to more than one emergency at a time. Very concerned, and very concerned about the officers. So I'm interested in, hearing from my colleagues about how we might consider doing some polling around these kinds of things to see what compels people. Because I got the sense that there was support, there wasn't really opposition, but in my experience having worked here, you need to have people feel compelled to be supportive, to go out to vote. And maybe we're not quite there yet, but I think it's important that we keep going and try to get there.
So. I want to just affirm that these data show that all the reasons you say are compelling to people. They also show that they're generally satisfied with the way things are as well, and they have real concerns about affordability. How people weigh and balance those and the privacy of their own homes with their ballot, right? May be different than when we're talking to someone as trusted and credible and knowledgeable as you.
See, I guess here's what I'm struggling with. I ran a mayoral campaign last year that involved me personally knocking on more than 1,000 doors and my campaign knocking on nearly 3,000 doors of likely voters and having sometimes 40-minute conversations with people. It took me, the better part of 6 months on the weekends and evenings to do that. In those conversations, one of the most important distinguishing characteristics between myself and other competitors was my position on the last levy. And in those conversations, hundreds of them, people who would immediately tell me that they didn't support the levy, why should they support me? When I would have the conversations talking through the kinds of things Councilor Newton's describing, and you have a brief or sometimes longer conversation, the feedback was real simple. The other levy was way too big. It wasn't specific enough. If it was focused on police services, I would have supported that. I heard that hundreds of times from people that voted no and who I actually think may very well have said no in your survey. Now, you can question whether or not that's because they're doing it in the privacy of their own home, but these are people who just stood there at the door and told me they didn't vote for the levy that I supported. So, they were being pretty frank with me. And so I really legitimately, I view that information as sort of qualitative and quantitative. I talked to more people at their doors than you guys surveyed on the phone by 3 or 4-fold. And can you comment on that? I don't know what to make of that, because it seems inconsistent with on some level, with what we have here.
Well, I certainly, you know your community and you know your community well. So I guess what I would say is that, those conversations some I'm sure are short, but some are in depth, as you mentioned, 40-minute conversations. And the reality is that in my experience, talking to voters in surveys, but certainly with a lot of focus groups, is most of the time people aren't paying that close of attention to the public policy that's happening in the community. Many can't mention, name the 3 branches of government or their state senator or what city council did recently. So, and they also have a difficult time distinguishing between what's a state sort of maybe tax that they've heard about or a local city tax that they've heard about. So, now is also different than the economy has changed, housing conditions have changed. There's some environmental changes that have occurred out there. So what your experience, I would say, is you and other members on council should say, well, we know when we can have those conversations with people in our community, they have an impact. Can you have, there's 50,000 residents of Tigard, many fewer voters, but can you expand that out, have those conversations with everybody who's going to turn out to vote, and especially those who maybe don't pay a lot of attention to local issues until they get their ballot. I think,
There's only 5,000 doors of people that vote all the time.
Yeah.
We just went through this a year ago, so
Right.
it's sort of top of mind. It's not, it's a much more concentrated group of people that actually make these decisions.
This is one piece of data that you have.
Yeah.
It would be exceptional for something to poll at this level to turn out in 6-8 months in turnaround. But it wouldn't be the most exceptional thing that ever happened politically. So, I would say take your experiences with voters as one data point and take this as another and balance them to appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Council President Goodhouse?
Just going to ask Councilor Lube if you had any questions or thoughts or questions on the polling, or I know, okay.
No, the explanations were, very robust and going through all the details. And I understand and I hear everything that's going on. And I think, with the political environment and that's going to happen within the next year, I think we're kind of in uncharted, weird territory of who's going to turn out, how they're going to vote, how they're feeling about everything. And as I stated in our bond and levy task force, I think there's honestly just a lot of government fatigue. People are tired. So it's a lot of information that was given to us and a lot of information in the polling. And I think it takes a lot of thought to try to figure out what's going to be the best way to sort of make sure that we have as much support as possible and as much discussion as possible, because I think every single one of us wants this to be successful because it's something that we need for the city. And so how do we best move that forward? And, you know, this information is helpful.
Yeah, I
to
mean,
look at.
on a practical level, you know, I don't think we can continue having 40% of our police shifts in a town of 54,000 people with 3 staff members. So if not now, then when? And I mean, like, I guess I'm going very practical on the, you know, we know May of even years, you both showed the, you know, the typical voter turnout. We know that money measures in Washington County over the last 25 years have gotten 5.5% more support on even year May primary elections. Like what, I guess I just, like, as we continue this conversation, I want all of us thinking about, if not now, then when, and, or is it just acceptable to say, you know what, we are comfortable with policing this city 40% of the time with 3 officers. I mean, that's essentially what we're going to be saying. Council President Goodhouse?
Well, we're having a discussion now. That's what I was going to say for later, but I think if not now, when? I mean, I think we have to do it now. I think we have to tweak it and find what's going to work. I always kind of say sometimes with council, sometimes we have to make the hard decisions, and maybe something's not there. Maybe that means that there's more of a job to do, and councilors fall in that wonderful position where we can not only represent the city, but we can also be out there and campaign. And I think that just means there's a harder lift this time, and I think it's something that the community, we see the writing on the wall, we see response times getting worse. So we just need to figure out what the proper message is and how to get out there and do it. So that's where I think we need to craft this a little bit. But waiting till the public comes around, sometimes they don't realize it and get to a point where the crime's so bad, that's not the answer either. So I think we need to figure out what we need to do the next poll round to maybe get a little bit more, dial it in. But I think if anything, it shows there's got to be more work out there and work the numbers and push them to where we need to be. I mean, the last one, what was only 4 percentage points we have to really move, and that was with a convoluted ballot title. So I see the same thing. Every time I talk to people and they say, you know, talk about not safe routes, but safety levy, they're all for it. Fine, it's something simple and to understand. So it's kind of interesting to see the numbers are adding up with what people say.
I think we need to spend some time working in the next survey on the cost sensitivity. In particular, I think that's an area that needs a lot of focus. We're going to have to sharpen our pencils on what's included and what's not, and what is the minimum amount that we can still achieve the outcomes from a staffing perspective that we're looking for. Councilor Anderson, you've been very quiet. You want to share anything?
Well, I was surprised actually and disappointed on the results, and because the message really can't be any more clear and defined, and especially as compared to last election, which was very vague. So I thought that it was going to do better, and it's not a luxury to have these police out there. So I think we put it out in May and it fails, we got to put it out next year, and next year after that until it passes. It's just the reality of our tax structure.
Yeah, I mean, it's you have choice in front of you in the strategy. There's different pros and cons. I mean, that you just mentioned that is something that other communities do. You see, PPS, I forget it was 11 and 12, or about that period. Portland Public Schools, where the measure fails in one election cycle, they make some changes to the amount and go back to the voters not long afterwards. The advantage of that is voters here that see that the leaders had listened to them, and the community conversation occurs over a long period of time. I mean, it is similar to what Salem did, right? They put a marginal issue on the ballot. It failed marginally. They made some changes, and the voters got to yes. That is another strategy, is to go forth with an expectation that things might not be successful this time, but it forces a conversation in the community, and you can learn from that about how to make adjustments. That is another way to think about moving forward as well.
So next week we're going to be having conversation about the financial side of this.
Yes, we want to make sure the council has a an understanding of the amount that we tested in this survey and that we've been talking about throughout the year has been 46 cents per thousand, and also what the services are that are provided for that amount. And so we want you to understand how we arrived at that and what some alternative cost packages might look like, including the services associated with them. So you'll have another chance next week, and we are seeking your guidance about, will we do an additional survey? What are you interested in knowing through that process? And what else about the levy package and alternatives do you want to explore?
Are you seeking that tonight?
As much as you are willing to discuss and give guidance about tonight, we would take, and you'll have another chance next week too.
Okay, Councilor Newton?
Yeah, that is a good segue into what I was going to say. You mentioned earlier tonight, City Manager Wine, that we are looking at having to make a decision about going in May, in January or February.
The latest date would be early February,
Okay.
but I know that the council, in considering ballot titles, sometimes has more than one meeting that you're considering it.
So we've
And there
gone a
might be
little
some benefit to referring earlier also, which we experienced in 2018, so it's certainly possible to do that earlier.
And so I guess with that, I'm of a mind that we're moving forward. We're going to decide January whether we're actually going to refer in May. But this is an important community issue, so I think we need to be moving forward with the conversation. And I'm interested in doing additional polling in December if we think that could help us in terms of refining. So, sorry, I'm going on and on. But I have a question for you. What kinds of things, having done this polling, knowing what we're hearing, what we've said, and this list that I think is helpful, what kinds of things do you think might be beneficial for the next polling?
I think the most important thing is what I understand where I sit now, to test things around cost sensitivity and types of packages. There could be more work with communications, but between the research we've done in the past around community values and what they see as community needs, the focus groups that we've done, this research here, I actually think that we have a good grasp with the communications and the messages, and many of them did very, very well here. So I probably wouldn't prioritize there, but prioritize more around giving you a sense if there are different ways to package this together to get to 50% plus one.
Council President Goodhouse?
For throwing feedback in with proposing moving forward, I would say, and we've been kind of time talks back and forth portion out. I think we had the conversation before that it enters like a legality issue too, that if we put the safe routes in here, any future renewals of it would also have to always tie that to it. So I would say moving forward, not having the safe routes in there. I'd like to see what under 40 cents would look like, doing a 39 cents or something like that, how that would move the needle. And the other portion would be ballot title. I know that when it comes to it, to the final decision, the council kind of looks at writing ballot titles. I'd love to maybe have us either work together or myself and maybe work on some ballot titles, because we've had luck with that before. So maybe if we can propose one or two out there to put on the.
Just so you probably don't know what he's referencing, but we've had some unorthodox city council decisions around ballot titles that we think have resulted in positive outcomes, but made the staff cringe.
Well, I will say, just speaking like from my professional experience, it is not at all unusual to test different versions of ballot titles because language matters. If you're going to get people's attention on a ballot for 30 seconds when they're marking yes or no, those word choices matter. So in addition to packages and cost sensitivity, you might look at different options.
That's what I'm alluding towards. We had a successful one where we pushed the limit and made, like as the mayor said, made staff cringe, but I think that made all the difference.
Got the outcome we wanted. Okay. Are there other comments or feedback? I know we're way over time on the agenda. Councilor Anderson?
Yeah, just quickly, the bond on the police facility was interesting, but I think we are going to delay that a little bit, and so that would probably not need to be included.
Do we want any consensus on whether to keep including safe routes or not? My own reason on that is if we keep putting that, not only this, but also on our social media and our efforts. If we keep putting it out there, I feel like we split two different differences. We're trying to explain and work on safe routes, and we're trying to do the safety. I think right now, if we start narrowing it down, do we have other consensus on the council as far as proceed forward with looking at and considering safe routes, or pulling that off due to the kind of legality as well?
Well, we've already had a prior conversation where there was sort of the movement towards some consensus on that. I think there was some dissenting perspectives. If what you're suggesting is that we do or don't test it, I think in a future survey, I think that's going to depend on our conversation next week about money. If everybody's okay with that?
I think once we have the discussion next week about money, if it's okay with the city manager, we could maybe talk a little bit more about these cost sensitivity and alternative packages, because I think that's a good thing to, as we move forward with more polling. But we might be able to firm that up once we have more information on money, if that's okay, if that's not too much of a delay.
The only reason I mentioned it is the sooner we can kind of figure that out, so we can start pulling that part, even just from the community outreach we're doing with the city, and start isolating more. And I think we're getting these numbers and figuring them, but if we can get more defined word even putting out to the public now, this is the campaign mode we're in right now, of getting that out there. So sooner we can decide that and find out what the city communication works.
Okay, any other final comments? We have no executive session scheduled. We have no non-agenda items. I'll entertain a motion for adjournment. And thank you both very much.
I move for adjournment.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we are adjourned.
I'm hungry. They are in trouble, huh? With Carol. You don't want to be in trouble with Carol, that's never good. Yeah. Did he text you or something?